pleasure to introduce Norman Finkelstein, or Stein. How do you pronounce that?
You can call me anything, but not late for dinner. Okay.
You're on, Norman. Take it away.
Great. Well, thank you. It's really so great to be with you. I'm sorry I can't be with you in Chicago, but isn't Zoom this wonderful thing that has saved us in the last year and a half? So I'm delighted to be here. I am a retired teacher. I've taught in Hebrew College for the last 38 years here in Boston. I've also been a public school librarian at the same time. Very, very busy. And I also write. So one of my books, which caught Hillary's attention when a part of it appeared in My Jewish Learning, is the JPS Guide to American Jewish History. I've always been interested in history. As a kid, I think I was the only sixth grader who regularly read the New York Times. And this has led to me writing 21 books so far, either biography, nonfiction, all of course dealing with history. Civil War, important part of our history here in the United States. And I want to spend a little time with you today talking about aspects of the Civil War. I will not be delving into war battles. I will not be talking about military strategy. You have many other ways to learn about those things. Rather, I want to focus on a few key events of the war where Jews were not shy about asserting their rights as equal citizens. So to do that, I'm going to share screen, and you won't be seeing me, but you'll be looking at some photographs as I do my presentation. Afterwards, we'll return, and I look forward to your questions and comments. So at the time of the American Revolution, the Jewish population in all 13 colonies was less than 2,500. By the outbreak of the Civil War, that number had grown to about 150,000, mostly recent immigrants from German-speaking Central Europe. The Civil War divided Jews as it did all Americans. Southern Jews supported the Confederacy, Northern Jews favored the Union. Prior to the war, Jews never took a public stand on slavery. Although many shared anti-slavery opinions in the North, some Southern Jews did as well. Jews in the South were not plantation owners. They were small business people and shopkeepers. Some did own slaves, but not in the numbers living on the large plantations. As the Civil War loomed, Rabbi Morris Raphael of New York delivered a sermon which was widely reprinted in the South. He holds the distinction of being the first rabbi to give an invocation to Congress. So his sermon was titled A Bible View of Slavery. And in it he wrote, "Slaveholding is no sin." This so incensed Rabbi David Einhorn of Baltimore that he forcefully rebutted Raphael in sermons and in print. He said, "Is slavery a moral evil or not?" Rabbi Einhorn's life was threatened, and he was forced to leave Maryland, a border state with a large number of Confederate sympathizers. When war broke out, Jewish men signed up to fight. It is estimated that 7,000 fought for the North, 3,000 for the South, and that in a percentage greater than their less than 0.5% of the American population. Allegiances depended on where they lived, as they tended to side with the political views of their neighbors. Jewish soldiers on both sides fought valiantly, with several receiving high ranks in their respective armies. 6 soldiers in the Union Army actually were awarded the coveted Congressional Medal of Honor for their bravery. In 1861, Congress ordered each regiment to secure a military chaplain with the requirement that, quote, he must be a regular ordained minister of a Christian denomination. An Ohio congressman argued in response, there is a large body of men in this country, and one growing continually, of the Hebrew faith. His argument did not prevail. Just before President Lincoln signed the new law, the 65th Regiment of the 5th Pennsylvania Cavalry appointed a Hebrew school teacher by the name of Michael Allen, a person with an extensive religious background and knowledge, as their chaplain. But with the new law now in effect, he was forced to resign. The regiment, the Cameron Dragoons, a largely Jewish regiment, then under the command of a Jew named Max Friedman, did not back down. Friedman then appointed Rabbi Dr. Arnold Fischel to replace Allen. After all, the rabbi was an ordained clergyman. But the War Department turned down his request for a commission since he was not a Christian. Jews were concerned that their wounded soldiers could not be ministered by a rabbi. They feared that Christian clergy would try to convert vulnerable Jewish soldiers. The Jewish community was incensed. They sent letters and petitions to political leaders and held rallies locally. In 1859, the first Jewish civil rights organization was formed. Taking its name from an already established British group, the Board of Delegates of American Israelites accepted the challenge to overturn the congressional mandate that limited chaplains to Christian clergy. They engaged Rabbi Fischel to lobby the president. And importantly, this is the first time Jews in America organized themselves to lobby political leaders. On December 11th, 1861, Rabbi Fischel appeared at the White House and met with President Lincoln. Carrying petitions from Jewish and non-Jewish groups around the country, Fischel argued that the current law was not only unfair, but unconstitutional. The president agreed. While Protestant groups largely objected, Congress also agreed with Fischel and the president and passed an amendment to the law stating that chaplains only needed to be ordained by, quote, some religious denomination. On July 17, 1862, Lincoln signed the new law and a few weeks later appointed Rabbi Jacob Frankel of Philadelphia's Rodef Shalom Synagogue as the Army's first Jewish chaplain. The small number of Jewish chaplains led ordinary Jewish soldiers to practice their religion in whatever way they could. There is a letter from Union Private J.A. Joel, who explains the way he and his compatriots celebrated Passover in 1862 West Virginia, and I quote, "We were now able to keep the Seder nights, if only we could obtain the other requisites for that occasion. We held a consultation and decided to send parties to forage in the country. We obtained 2 kegs of cider, a lamb, several chickens, and some eggs. Horseradish or parsley we could not obtain. But in lieu, we found a weed, whose bitterness, I apprehend, exceeded anything our forefathers enjoyed. The herb excited our thirst to such a degree that we forgot the law authorizing us to drink only 4 cups, and the consequence was we drank up all the cider. Those that drank more freely became excited. One thought he was Moses, another Aaron, and one had the audacity to call himself Pharaoh." I love that story. The Civil War divided the country, But with the importance of cotton to both sides, borders offered no barriers. Southern cotton was needed by northern factories to make uniforms and civilian clothing. Cotton trading continued, mostly against the law, and attracted large number of speculators from the north who tried to make a profit by illegally smuggling Southern cotton. I should mention that some of the largest clothing manufacturers in the north were Jews. The war was being fought on American soil, and the armies on both sides were accompanied by ragtag groups of traders known as sutlers. They were tailors, barbers, sellers of goods and services, and smugglers of cotton. Among these sutlers were Jews, many recent arrivals from Europe where peddling was a Jewish profession. They were easily recognizable because of their accented English, their obvious Jewish names, and their immigrant ways. The shadow arming of sutlers and the illegal trading of cotton upset Major General Ulysses S. Grant. Despite the fact that his own father was engaged in the shadowy buying of Southern cotton, an angry Grant issued his infamous Order Number 11, expelling all Jews from his Department of the Tennessee, which included large sections of Mississippi, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Reminiscent of the expulsion orders that plagued European Jews for centuries, this was the only official anti-Semitic order ever issued in the name of the United States government. You can see the order as represented here. It left no room for any kind of other decision other than getting rid of the Jews within 24 hours. So these traders may have been General Grant's real expulsion targets, but the language in Order 11 referred to, quote, all Jews as a class, thereby including innocent and respected Jewish citizens, many of whom had lived in the area peacefully for years. He probably did not also realize that his hastily drawn up order could also apply to Jewish soldiers under his command. Jewish groups around the country were appalled. They drew up petitions, sent letters and telegrams, but one man from Paducah, Kentucky saved the day. Caesar Kaskel, a local merchant who had only arrived in Paducah 4 years earlier from Germany, was driven to action. He thought, this is unfair. His anger grew. Yes, it was 1862 and the entire country was engaged in the Civil War, but he and his Jewish neighbors were respected members of the community and loyal to the United States. Thousands of Jewish soldiers were at that very moment fighting and dying for the Union. Caesar could not keep quiet. The only way to overturn this unfair order was to appeal directly to Washington. He had to do something, and quickly. Greatly insulted by this inhuman order, he joined with his Jewish neighbors and sent a telegram to Abraham Lincoln. They reminded the president they were, quote, good and loyal citizens of the United States, and were greatly insulted and outraged by this inhuman order, the carrying out of which would be the grossest violation of the Constitution and our rights. They urged the president to immediately cancel Grant's order. Otherwise, Jewish Americans would appear, quote, as outlaws before the whole world. On December 30th, there was still no response to the telegram, as Caesar and the remaining Jewish families of Paducah were herded aboard the steamer Charlie Bowen. The trip up the Ohio River to Cairo, Illinois, took the Jewish passengers out of Grant's territory. Caesar could not just quietly leave and forget the injustice. While on board, he wrote an account of what happened. When the boat reached Cairo, he handed it to an Associated Press reporter. It did not take long for the story of the expelled Jews to appear in newspapers throughout the country. When President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, a Memphis, Tennessee newspaper printed Caesar's report on the front page just below a copy of the proclamation. Readers were astonished that just as the United States was freeing African-American slaves, Jewish Americans were being expelled from their homes. The publicity did not change the reality. Caesar now knew he had to go to Washington without delay to see the president. From Cairo, after a long and uncomfortable train trip, a bedraggled Caesar finally reached Washington on Saturday, January 3rd, traveling on the Sabbath on his urgent mission. His first stop was the office of Congressman John Addison Gurley, a friend of President Lincoln. It was already dark when Gurley accompanied Caesar to the White House. When the president was told of their arrival, he sent word that, quote, he was always glad to see his friends. Ushered into President Lincoln's office, still wearing his dusty travel clothes, Caesar told Lincoln about the unjust order and the expulsions. The president listened attentively, but could not believe what he heard until Caesar presented him with the copy of Grant's Order Number 11, handed to him by an officer in Paducah. The president turned to Caesar and, referring to the Bible, purportedly asked, quote, so the children of Israel were driven from the happy land of Canaan? Caesar responded purportedly, yes, and that is why we have come unto the bosom of Father Abraham seeking protection. Lincoln smiled, quote, and the protection they shall have. You may return to Paducah when you wish, he told Caesar, and added, before you reach there, the order will have been removed. Lincoln sent a carefully worded telegram to Grant, gingerly tiptoeing around an accusation that the general could have been responsible for such an egregious order. The president did not want to directly blame his most important general at the height of the war. And I love the way the telegram was phrased. Basically it said to Grant, I can't believe you did this. What are you, a nut? But if such an order has been issued, it will be immediately revoked. And it was. By direction of the General-in-Chief of the Army at Washington, the general order expelling Jews is hereby revoked. So Grant did the only logical thing, of course. He reversed the original order. As luck would have it, the order never reached most of the army posts in his department, since Confederate soldiers, fortunately, had cut down the telegraph lines from his headquarters at Holly Springs. Nonetheless, a number of Jews were directly impacted with harsh treatment and temporary expulsions. Much relieved, Caesar traveled back to his expelled friends in Cairo, and together they returned to Paducah. When their boat landed, armed soldiers blocked their way into the city. An officer who apparently had not yet heard of President Lincoln's action asked by what right they had returned. Caesar proudly responded, by the order of the President of the United States. After the war, Caesar Kaskel and his brother moved to New York City, where they opened the most fashionable men's clothing store in the city, Kaskel and Kaskel. Approximately 3,000 Jews served in the Confederate Army. Unlike most Jewish Union soldiers, their families tended to be native-born and well-established in their communities. The most prominent Jewish figure on both sides was Judah Benjamin. A United States Senator from Louisiana, he turned down an appointment to the United States Supreme Court to become Attorney General, Secretary of War, and finally Secretary of State of the Confederacy. Often referred to as the brains of the Confederacy, he remains the only Jew ever to appear on American currency. Don't try to spend this at your local supermarket. Despite his contributions to the cause, he still faced anti-Semitism from his colleagues. And there's there's a wonderful poem by Stephen Vincent Benet, John Brown's Body. And in it, there's a short stanza that refers to Benjamin and the fact that even though he achieved such high rank within the Confederate government, he was a Jew and he was suspect. So let me read you this little stanza. Judah P. Benjamin, the dapper Jew, seal, sleek, black-eyed, lawyer and epicure, able, well-hated, face alive with life, looked around the council chamber with the slight perpetual smile he held before himself, continually like a silk-ribbed fan. His quick, shrewd, fluid mind weighed Gentiles in an old balance. The eyes stared, searching. I am a Jew. What am I doing here? That kind of summarizes Benjamin's work within the Confederacy. The role of Jewish women during the war has been largely downplayed. In both North and South, they joined together in their communities to raise money, sew uniforms, and tend to the sick and wounded soldiers. In Philadelphia, where the Mikveh Israel synagogue turned into a hospital, the women of the congregation served there. Likewise, in Columbus, Georgia, Jewish women comforted wounded Confederate soldiers. A legacy of the Civil War was the recognition that Jews were indeed a part of the American experience. In the North in particular, they took at face value the rights guaranteed by the United States Constitution. They were not afraid to proudly stand up for their rights, setting the precedent for the generations of American Jews who followed. I want to end on a sad note. So during the war, during any war, the worst crime that a soldier could commit was desertion. And we have a record. In fact, I have the actual court-martial records right here. Copy. A private, George Kuhn, Jewish, who had just arrived from Germany within 2 years before enlisting into the army, went AWOL. He deserted. And his court-martial was held, found him guilty, and he did not really defend himself. He had nothing to defend with. And the court-martial took place with several other deserters. And now it's time to carry out the execution by firing squad. The other people so condemned were 2 Protestants and a Catholic. So the question now arose because each one of them was entitled to having a clergyman by his side. Perhaps not to the side directly when the shots were fired, but nearby. The Army located a rabbi in Baltimore, Maryland. This took place in Maryland, by the name of Benjamin Zold. He's the father of Henrietta Zold, the founder of Hadassah. And together, Rabbi Zold, a Protestant minister, and a Roman Catholic priest ministered to the condemned before their death. This basically making it the first time in American history that there was an all-denominational funeral. So poor George Kuhn, of course, met his maker, but the image of, in fact, a rabbi, a priest, and a minister being together kind of says it all about Jews and other denominations, getting along in America. So that's my little formal presentation. I hope you have a lot of questions to ask, and I will let Hillary take it from here.
We do have questions. We do. And as I mentioned to you earlier, this is a particular topic of interest for me. So let's see. Susan would like to know, I never even thought about Jews in the Civil War. What prompted you to delve into this issue?
Well, I've taught American Jewish history for decades, and this was part of it. So naturally, I became interested as well. And so, when I was writing this book, the Civil War has to, you know, has to fit into it. And so that's when I delved a little more, research. It's a fascinating story because it indicates, how American Jews, both North and South, thought of themselves as being part of this country. In parts of the South and in parts of the North, there were companies that were organized by Jews. It just was the thing that they did. If you were in the North, you were going to be loyal to the North and your neighbors, and likewise in the South, you were going to be loyal to your neighbors as well. It's really a fascinating story. The Jews died in the Civil War. They were wounded in the Civil War, just like other Americans. They were doing their part.
Okay, please send your questions in the chat box. Norman wants to hear from you. Elisa is asking, can you speak to how Confederate Jews reconciled their acceptance of slavery with Pesach?
This is the eternal, that's a wonderful question, because that's the eternal question. You have to wonder, So as I mentioned, Jewish slaveholders in the South were doing what their neighbors did. Again, Jews did not own large plantations, so at the most, a Jew may have owned a slave or two, or someone to work in the store, or something of that sort. They weren't, majorly into this, but they were doing what their neighbors did, and so I've always wondered that question as well. So and there were instances where Jews would be sitting around at a Seder at Pesach, and they were being, served by a slave. I mean, go figure. I can't get my head into that either.
So when you talk about Judah Benjamin being part of the Confederacy, right? I mean, he's part of this slave owning sort of group of people, and he's also somewhat highly regarded for things that he's done. So I found that I've read about him in other books, and I find that surprising. I guess that wasn't something I knew about him.
He was a very, very brilliant lawyer. He served in the United States Senate. He was offered a seat on the United States Supreme Court, and he turns it down so that he could, go join the Confederacy. Afterwards, when the war is over, of course, he becomes one of the most hunted figures of the Confederacy that the North would like to get their hands on. He flees first to Canada. In fact, we were in Montreal a number of years ago, and walking through the streets, and we're going to a department store. I can't remember which one, and on the side of the store, because I always read plaques. It annoys my wife, but I always read plaques when I find them. And apparently, the plaque basically said, Judah Benjamin slept here on his way to England. In England, he recreates himself as probably one of the most important lawyers. He writes a law book, a British law that is still in use today. So a very accomplished guy, but he had his feelings. He grew up in the South and he was loyal to the South.
Another question from Susan. What was the highest rank a Jew held in the Civil War? And were there any medals given to the Jews for their efforts?
As a matter of fact, yeah, there were several generals, actually. Um, some of the units of the Civil War were locally constituted, and you could, if you grabbed a bunch of guys together, create your own unit, and kind of create your own rank, going into the war. But there were several generals. And there were a number of Jews, as I mentioned in the presentation, who received the Congressional Medal of Honor in the North. And so Jews fought and died, bravely, just like their neighbors. The interesting thing is that their representation in the military on both sides was greater than the percentage of Jews in the population. And this belies, the mythical stereotype that Jews don't serve in the military. But in every single war that America has fought, including the Civil War, and even you can include the Revolutionary War too, Jews fought in greater numbers than their percentage in the general population.
So Davida has a question, and it was something that I was stewing in my mind as well. Can you tell us more about the all-Jewish regiment, the Cameron Dragoons? I mean, did the Jews really keep to themselves in their own sort of regiment?
No, not at all. No, the Dragoons were formed by Captain Major whatever Friedman, who I mentioned, but there were non-Jews in the in the regiment as well. It was just that's how it was formed. There were no all Jewish units in the army at all. Jews were generally spread about with everyone else.
So, I mean, were these observant Jews?
Well, that's a good question. It depends on how you define observant. I think many of them tried. There are several instances of reminiscences, particularly about the high holidays and wherever. And there was one memoir that I wrote where they had engaged a sutler to find kosher meat, to bring kosher meat back to the unit, for them to observe the high holidays. And there were also instances too where local commanders, where possible, would grant leave for soldiers to go home to observe Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. It didn't happen a lot, but there are instances of that happening. I cannot speak to the kashrut of soldiers, in battle, but the Jews were aware of them being Jews and tried as much as they could to to observe holidays, and so forth. I'm sure, I shouldn't say that, I'm guessing there was no daily minyan, anywhere, but they did what they could.
And does that include, like, Jacqueline's asking about Shabbat? Like, is there any record of these soldiers keeping the Sabbath?
No, not that I could find. No. My guess is that no, they went along with what was required of them, in the army. I mean, they knew they were Jews, and they were at war, and they did what they had to do. In wars later, particularly World War I, there were real efforts made to provide soldiers with sidurim and to hold services on a regular basis and bases and so forth. The Civil War, we're not quite ready for that. As far as I can deduce. But you know, the soldiers were certainly, you know, cognizant of who they were, and you know, tried as best they could to, you know, be Jewish in the middle of the battle.
Is there any writings from any rabbis of that time about how they felt about these Jews who, you know, they came to the United States, to, wasn't quite the United States at this time, but, you know, came to America in order to have their religious freedom, and now they're fighting against each other, because I'm sure, you know, there were soldiers on both sides. So are there any writings from any rabbis at this time?
I don't know. There must have been, but I do not know. My best guess is that American Jews at the outbreak of the Civil War were largely an immigrant population. Jews who had come to this country in large numbers starting in 1840, largely from German-speaking lands. By now we had, you know, a second generation Americanized, and for many of the immigrants who came within a couple of years of the Civil War, like Caesar Caskel, for example, comes 4 years, you know, before. Many of them felt that it was an obligation, being in this country, to fight for liberty. And many of them left Europe, which at that time was really divided. You know, people fighting for their rights and so forth. And so they come here and they feel that, you know, as Americans, they really need to do their thing. Most of these German-speaking immigrants fought in the North because that's where they arrived. That's where they arrived to. In the South, we had older families, families that had arrived, you know, much earlier, and so the sons of those families, you know, tended to be, you know, fully. Well, I was Confederatized, fully Americanized, and had the same feelings as their neighbors in terms of, you know, fighting for their rights. But many of the Jews in the Northern Army were either sons of recent immigrants or recent immigrants themselves.
So fascinating to, you know, like you're new here, you're the new kid on the block, and you just you know, you just jump in with both feet. And I think that's something that's been discussed, you know, over the course of the last several years too. There are plenty of immigrants that come to America. They join our armed forces, and yet they still don't necessarily have citizenship.
Well, I think there were a number of these recent immigrants as well who come over, they're poor, they have nothing. And so, you know, joining the army for whatever reason gave them some money. That may have been, you know, a factor as well. You know, who knows? I mean, the whole thing with my emphasis in the Civil War is how the Civil War basically transformed American Jews, and the instances that I, you know, recall with you, you know, today, kind of emphasized, you know, what it took for American Jews to fight for their rights in this country. You know, the fight for the chaplaincy, for example. That's an important thing. The fact that we have at this point several major Jewish organizations. B'nai B'rith was established just a few years earlier, and they become very, very vocal, you know, in standing up for Jewish rights. And the Board of Jewish Deputies was kind of this overall umbrella organization, kind of the earlier, you know, Jewish Federation model, and this was very, very important because Jews felt that they could stand up to government. That Caesar Caskel going to Washington, and he's not alone. He's the first. He's the guy who really, does it. Deserves a lot of credit. Caesar does, but B'nai B'rith lodges sent telegrams to Lincoln. Delegations of rabbis went to Lincoln. After the fact, but the fact that they were received by the president, and listened to, and respected. I mean, this is quite a watershed moment for American Jews, and it sets the foundation for what we as Jews have done, marching on. A very pivotal moment. Despite the blood and the gore and whatever of war, it's this background stuff that really made a lasting impression, on Jews and non-Jews in terms of American Jews having the same rights as their neighbors.
Did most of the most of the Jews, were they conscripted or did they join on their own?
No, most Jews joined on their own. Most soldiers joined on their own. Conscription comes much later in the war, leading to draft riots in New York City. But most Jews just signed up, both North and South.
Davida says her husband is a collector of Civil War memorabilia. She's looked for a published book of letters written by a Jewish Colonel Marcus. Can't seem to find it. Are you familiar with this colonel and his letters home?
I want to say I've seen them. There is a website, and it has always escaped my mind. But if you Google Jews Civil War, you'll come across this amazing website that has all kinds of memoirs on it from both the North and the South. It really makes it extremely interesting reading. And these are direct sources. They're either memoirs, letters, it just gives you a large picture of Jews in the Civil War. And again, I'm sorry I can't remember the exact site, but you can find it just easily by Googling.
Yeah. I don't believe there are any more questions. There's none in the chat box. So Norman, you've written other books besides things on the Civil War. You want to tell us a little bit about what else you're interested in?
My books are all over the place. It depends on I have an eclectic mind. So I've done a book about the history of plastics, which also has Jewish content in it. And I've done biographies of Edward R. Murrow and Douglas MacArthur, all over the place. My recent book just came out a month and a half ago, is The Shelter and the Fence, which talks about an unusual occurrence in World War II. 1944, 1,000 Holocaust refugees are brought to the United States and brought to Fort Ontario in Oswego, New York. And this is the first and only time that Holocaust refugees were rescued into the United States. And it's an amazing story of what happened to these people, how they got, to Fort Ontario, what they did in Fort Ontario. They were not considered legal aliens. They were, quote, guests of President Roosevelt. And they were confined to the city of Oswego. They really couldn't leave. They had come from concentration camps. They had come, and their first arrival at the fort was a frightening one to them because there were guard towers, there were armed guards, and it was reminiscent of concentration camp. But as one survivor later said, they gave us, drinks and ice cream, so we knew it wasn't a concentration camp. And so then what happens, they sign a statement before they leave Europe that once the war is over, they're going to be returned to their homeland. So as the war winds down, 1945, there's a real question. These people are getting very nervous because, first of all, they don't want to go back to Europe. And secondly, there's no Europe for them to go back to. Their families are dead. Their houses don't exist. And so there's a push now to see what can be done to allow them to stay in the United States. And that's an amazing story on its own. President Truman at the time works out kind of a plan and says basically, because the quota system was not being used during World War II, we can make these people, official by granting them, visas under the quotas that weren't used during the war. The only problem is, to get a visa, you have to be outside of the United States. So the question is, wait a minute, are we going to send these people back to Europe to get a visa to come back to the United States? And then it dawned on someone that, wait a minute, there's a foreign country 2 hours away from Fort Ontario. It's called Canada. And so they began busing people back. It's a great story.
Excellent. Well, Norman, thank you so much for sharing the story with us. Like I said before, I really enjoyed it. This is a particular interest of history of mine, so I appreciate it. I just wanted to point out to everyone, I just put in the chat box that on Sunday we are celebrating the 118th year of JCC Chicago's impact on the community, in the community. We've got a whole slate of programs for all age categories. They're all free. The adult programs are some in person, some are virtual. So if you live a little farther away, you're still welcome to join us. And more information about that on our website. And our next film festival starts on November 5th. Also information about that virtually on our website. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks for the next JCC Community Tuesdays. Next week, CJE will be doing the program, and that's it. So Norman, thank you so much again. We really appreciate you joining us. Everyone have a great day and take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.